Rule number 5 is you structure the environment so that you have a chance to win. And this was set up for a Friday at 5:15. So I'm the last guy you'll be talking to Friday. So I know I have plenty of time. Well, I knew that all this work and effort, if Volpe doesn't agree, I'm through. I'm finished. I'm defeated. Now, one thing I did promise my bank was I will call you every Friday and tell you what happened the previous week. I'm going to give them the good news, I'm going to give them the bad news, then I'm going to give them what I'm going to do about it. Without fail. So they know exactly what's going on. No surprises. Well, the day came, Friday came. I had arranged a breakfast lunch, or not lunch, a breakfast meal with Joe Bosco, most influential man in Volpe's life, next to his wife. And I went through my story and how important this meeting was and why this makes sense, and all the people involved that I'd contacted. Now, I must admit here that after this article came out in Fortune and the Washington Post, the press were hounding me. Over and over again. Talk to them. Articles were appearing all over the country that I knew nothing about. Some I did. Done my best to collect as much as I can, but I couldn't keep track. Interviews. On and on it went. Radio interviews. I couldn't believe it. People, here, put the microphone up. They had a little box right there. I remember this one lady, a little box. And this is going into Vermont, for example, an interview. And she represents a radio station in Vermont. It's amazing how that worked. Well, when I finished with Joe Bosco, here's what he said. He said, "What you have said to me is morally right. It is legally right, and it is politically right. I will tell Volpe that when he meets with you at 5:15 today, he gives you all the time you need." And I thanked him. But this was really win or lose stuff. Well, I got so sick after this breakfast that I went into a bathroom and I vomited. It all came down to one meeting. I did not know who would all be there. But I knew that Volpe would be there, and I knew that Bosco would be there, and I knew that Audrey Warren and Steele, Dick Sullivan would be there. That's all I knew. So I went to my little apartment, and I was shaking, and I felt like I was just going to burn right up. And I got into the water in the bathtub. I made it kind of a little bit cool so I could cool down. And then in that little plastic room, everywhere I looked was just plastic and ugly as could be. And I didn't want to eat anything. Too excited to eat. I said my prayers over and over again. Because, boy, this win or lose thing was a pretty rough thing to take. And so finally, at 4 o'clock, I said, now I got a dress. I had one suit that was a pinstripe, a dark blue. I would wear it for just certain occasions. The other times I'd wear purple. I had 2 purple suits, orange, green. But I would save this one for certain occasions. But I always wore cowboy boots. But with that one, they were black alligator all the way. And I got dressed, and I made my way. Now, his office was as big as this entire house on this floor, easily. That main table was so huge, even bigger than Harrah's table that I've referenced before. Now, I was left in an outer area until such time as I'd be invited in. But I observed how that Audrey Warren came in and that Dick Sullivan came in, and they went right into the main office. I didn't. I wasn't invited in. They were there first. And finally, I was invited in. Now, I remember him saying, "Oh, Audrey," this was John A. Volpe, "it is so wonderful to have you here. Would you sit right next to me?" And so she pulled her chair right up there, right side by side to Volpe. The desk was bigger than that table. And gorgeous thing. But he also had his general counsel there. His name was George Washington, Jr., the first black man to graduate from the law school of Harvard. He did so with honors. There he was. He also had his assistant was there. He was on the other side of Volpe. And then there was the formidable Frank Turner, who I've referenced, the man who Eisenhower chose to head up and build the interstate system across America. Worked there in the department for over 42 years. The early days it was called the Bureau of Public Roads, but now it's the Department of Transportation. And then there was me. And I was directly across from Volpe. And as he introduced me to every person, I happen to know every person except George Washington, Jr. and his assistant. But he didn't know that. And then the most amazing thing happened. On his little sound system came on. Secretary, the SST has just passed the House. Now, if you don't know what the SST is, it's the supersonic transport, the plane that goes the speed of sound, over this, goes faster than the speed of sound, had just passed the House. He jumps up and says, "Get me President Nixon." So, in a few moments, comes back. "Mr. Secretary, the President is out of his office. You get me Haldeman." Okay. Comes back. "Mr. Secretary, Haldeman is out of his office. Then you get me Mr. Ehrlichman." Now that's the three right there that was literally running this government. Right there. Those three. Got the president and the two. Haldeman, Ehrlichman. Well, then, he said, came back, Ehrlichman is out of his office. "Is there anyone else that I can get for you?" He says, "No, I do not speak to second stringers." Never forget that. So I'm learning a little bit how things work there. Well, then he went on. He said, "You know what's wrong with this doggone government?" I was very interested right there. He said, "They're all a bunch of damn lawyers. And all they know what to do is to argue and to fight and get nothing done." And he went on about this. So I knew I'm learning something right there all along. And then when he finished, he said, "Mr. Snarr, the time is yours." It just in a flash, I said to myself, I cannot let anyone else interfere with what I'm saying. I have got to be so strong and so aggressive, and cannot break up my speed of talking, that no one can interject one thought until I have finished speaking. And so I stood up. I doubled up my fist and I went bang on his desk. Bang. "Do you know what's wrong with this government, Mr. Secretary? It's those damn lawyers." Then I shifted into it, explained how they were blocking this Highway Beautification Act. So I took his words and how he criticized them and criticized what they were doing with his words, with the Highway Beautification Act, pursuant to the all we're after is to test it. That's what they wanted to do with this prototype of the SST, was to test it. It was to be a pilot project on one airplane. That was what it was. That's all we want to do is to test this. And I took up about 45 minutes. And he sat there. Now, when I finished, Bosco came and got me and led me out. He says, "You have just sold the Secretary of Transportation." Now, he reported later what happened. When I left, he says, "That Doug Snarr reminds me of myself when I was his age." Because if you criticize me, you're criticizing him. So they were all right then stopped in their tracks. And all they could do was just stare. And he had him. Well, that was a miraculous thing in my life. I had nothing planned. I didn't know what I was going to do. I said, it's going to be totally extemporaneous. I just knew I was sick and worried to the death. But I knew that the ball game had changed. That Volpe was on board. And she had to go back and report what Volpe said. And he also told her, I'm behind highway beautification, and I'm behind the Moss bill 100%. I'll do everything I can in my power to get it enacted into law. So she had to carry that message to Clue. The empty head behind the smiling face. Well, now, the next meeting is the most talked about mayor in the United States. He'd been mayor longer than anybody else by far in the United States. He ran Chicago with an iron fist, Mayor Daley. How am I going to do that? How am I going to even get to him? So I went to Moss. I says, here's my situation. Doug, I'll get the meeting. He got me the meeting. So I flew in, had this limousine, colossal limousine, had a great big Polish guy, really just looked like, a heavyweight wrestler of some kind, meet me, but he had a nice, tender way about him. I really liked this guy. And he just talked about Mayor Daley the whole way, all the way from the airport to City Hall, how wonderful Mayor Daley was. And I asked him one question. I said, when we get through, do you know the best pizza place in Chicago? Absolutely, I know the best pizza place. I'll take you there. Well, Mayor Daley shook hands, and then he turned me over to his number one guy who has to do with all the legislation and everything that goes on in Congress and also within the Illinois department and the parliament. So I laid it out. He says, I see not one thing that would negatively affect Chicago. I'll call him and tell him we approve. Whew. So I got 2 down, 3, 1 more to go. So I got in the big limousine. He says, can I eat pizza with you? I said, yes. So he took me. I forgot the name, but it was the best pizza I'd ever had in my life. Up to that time, I just couldn't believe how wonderful it was. And the cheese was just piled on really thick. It was really good. If you like cheese, you'll love this pizza. But anyway, and he drove me back. I said, gosh, this guy's just a wonderful guy. He just after all I've been around and these other people I've been talking to, and I meet a guy that's kind of the real thing, If you can talk with kings, nor lose the common touch, as Kipling wrote, well, he had the common touch. But the White House. He stipulated that the White House not only got to approve this, but they got to also, as I mentioned to you, they have to provide in the budget the money in their budget to pay for it, in the budget. This took 7 months to try and get in that White House. Now, I went through all kinds of ideas. One idea was I finally wrote a letter. This was a recommended letter. I got the stationery from Bosco, had it all typed up, from Volpe to President Nixon. And where Volpe is saying that we have to have this. We've got to have this. And it's only $15 million. But what happened is, and then I had this letter, and then I waited for him to come to work. And as he came to work, I handed him this letter. I said, this is a letter from you to President Nixon. Hell fires, Doug. Here I am, a cabinet officer, and I can't even get in there to see him. He has himself so surrounded that even the cabinet officers can't talk to him. We don't even have regular meetings. It's absolutely terrible. I can't even get to Harley Ehrlichman and Haldeman, really, except just briefly on the phone. That's all. So they give me a little peepsqueak. I'll never forget this. A little pipsqueak. Yeah, I call it a pipsqueak. Who's about 27 years of age and got a doctor's degree from Harvard, and he doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground. And that's who I got to talk to. And this is absolutely the most frustrating thing that I've had as the Secretary of Transportation, to deal with that little pipsqueak. He doesn't know anything. And I've been the governor of Massachusetts 3 times. My construction company built this building that we're meeting in. This little pipsqueak, what has he done? And so I got a lecture. So I finally concluded 2 things. I said to Bosco, Bosco, why don't we take, instead of having this Moss bill all by itself, why don't we just take it, include it in the federal highway bill that passes every 2 years, and just allocate $15 million for however you want to call it. Highway beautification. To pay for signs on a pilot project. And not worry about some bill. So what we're going to do is we're going to ride caboose. You've got the train going down the road, well, we'll be the caboose, but we're hooked to the train. The train's a lot bigger than, some little thing all by itself, trying to go down the railroad tracks. I like that idea. I'm going to talk to the secretary about that idea. Well, that battered around for a while, and he agreed to do that. So that in his budget that he sends over to become part of the main budget that comes from the White House, because each department has to make a recommendation, then they lump all that together, and that becomes the federal budget. So he lumps it all together. But then I said to myself, Doug, I got to get in that White House somehow. So I made my mind up, I'm going to get in that White House. Now there is President Nixon, there is Haldeman, who is his secretary, main secretary, from California, by the way, and Ehrlichman, who's from Washington. Ehrlichman handles all policy, Haldeman handles all the people. Anyone to talk to him, anything. What's to be said, everything. He handles all that. So then I said to myself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start calling to the number 4 man. And that's a man named Chuck Colson. Chuck, I was able to get this information by digging and digging and digging. Chuck Colson was known as Mr. Dirty Tricks. Colson did things for Nixon, one-on-one. He reported directly to Nixon, not to Ehrlichman or Haldeman, and he had all the special projects. So when the Watergate thing broke, he was the man that Nixon used to implement the Watergate program. And Colson ended up in prison. Yeah, this was after my time. But Colson really had the eyes and ears of Nixon. So my idea was call Colson. So I started to call him every hour, on the hour, every hour I called. I remember this one time I was trying to kill some time, and I walked into this shoe store in Washington. I'll never forget this. And the hour was up, and I said, asked the man if I could use his telephone. I said, I have to make a phone call to the White House. I'm calling a man named Chuck Colson. Can I use your phone? Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Come on back here. Went into his little office complex there in the shoe store, and I made the phone call. And he answered the phone. Colson did. I said, is there any way that I can see you today or tomorrow? When can I see you? I'll see you midnight, anytime. And he says, well, I happen to be aware of you. There's been so much press on you. I'm aware of you. Come right now.